speakers. Our final speaker for this session is a local businessman, Phil Wendel. Phil started out his career as a teacher in the Chicago area, and as a sideline, started taking kids to Washington, D.C. on field trips. That turned into a business called Lakeland Tours, which he realized in order for that to be successful, he needed to live closer to D.C. And fortunately for us in Charlottesville, he chose Charlottesville as the place he wanted to relocate. Built the business, it's now called World Strides, and has always been very active. And as sort of a sideline at the beginning of this enterprise, he opened up a fitness center / health club in town. Ultimately, he became so engaged in that aspect of his life that he sold his travel company back to his employees and has focused the second part of his career on developing optimal wellness and fitness centers. And he has a string of clubs called ACAC in Charlottesville, Richmond, Baltimore, outside of Philadelphia, and he's building new ones along the East Coast all the time. Has been engaged in his national organization, IRSA, on their board of directors, and has really developed some very innovative programs, including some programs for children. So I asked him to come and talk a little bit about the private sector being engaged in increasing physical activity in that setting.
Everybody want to stand up for a second? Just reach out, reach out. I'm going to lead off with a question. Can I be heard in the back? I got a question. Between 1939 and 1945, 16 million American men went through a pre-induction physical for the armed forces. Our population at that time was roughly 140 to 150 million, half of what it was today. Be seated. What was the average weight of those 16 million men? Anybody want to take a guess at that? I'm sorry. 150? Do I hear it? It's not an auction. What else? Any other guesses? Sir? 145. 145. I can tell I've got an educated group. The average weight of that group was 140 pounds. Average height, 5'8" and 1/2 inches. So a lot has changed. What does the average American woman weigh today? Maybe that's an embarrassing question. The average American female today weight is, anybody know? Want to guess? 160. That's it. 165. We're all here for that reason. We're focusing specifically on youth. I have an I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of our industry. If you turn to the yellow pages, you would find health club. You would find 30,000 health clubs listed in the yellow pages nationally. Of those, probably 1/3 are YMCAs or local rec centers, and maybe 2/3 are for profit, like ourselves. A little bit about our particular club company, because I think what I have to say is relevant to what I've heard discussed before I came up here. We have 5 or 6 relatively large clubs. As Art pointed out, we have 2 in Richmond, 3 in Charlottesville, 1 in Pennsylvania, and then partnerships with another operator in Baltimore, Maryland. We have about 50,000 members. What percentage of American adults are members of actual health clubs? I know we're talking about youth, but I'm setting the table here. 1 in 6. So we have roughly 50 million Americans that are club members. A number of you might not be club members, but are active outside of the club environment. Do we know the percentage of Americans that get the right amount of physical activity? I'm talking adults now. Anybody want to take a guess at that? This has been a very enlightened audience. What percentage of adult Americans get the right amount? CDC recommendations. Go ahead. 3%? 8%? If you use the guideline 150 minutes of movement and 2 structured lifting sessions or 2 lifting sessions or 75 minutes of very active movement, that number dangles between 15 and 20%. If you look at the number of people that exercised absolutely 100 appropriately, the person who gave that very low percentage was correct. A little bit about our company. As Art said, this is my third career. I was a middle school teacher and very active in physical activity as a coach of a couple of sports. Sold my travel company in 1998 and opened my first club with the strength coach at the University of Virginia in 1984. As it related to youth, what we were doing with youth at that time, absolutely nothing. We had a very small child care center where parents, mostly moms, if they were doing a group exercise class, would drop off their youngster. Today we have 50,000 members, about 1,000 employees. And if you would have asked me to come up here 15 years ago, I would have had to say, Art, we're really not doing much with kids, but it's changed significantly, and I think for a lot of the reasons I've heard from the prior presenters. It's what's not going on in the home, and it's what's not going on in the schools that you found a number of parents turning to the for-profit sector or the non-for-profit sector to provide activities for youth. I'd like to suggest locally, our own Boys and Girls Club is probably one of the best in the country. James Pierce is the executive director. Art, if you're doing this activity next year, he has done absolutely phenomenal work with young people in our community. 2 years ago, their focus was on nutrition. Last year, in 2012, their focus was on physical activity, which we partnered with them on. But inside the walls of for-profit club companies like ours, here are the kinds of activities that are going on. We have any number today of two-parent working households. So we've established at all of our clubs after-school programs. We actually own some of our own buses that go out to the elementary schools locally. They'll pick up kids generally between 5 and 10 and 11 years old, take them to our clubs for 2 hours until the parents are finished with their respective jobs. What do we do with those kids within that 2-hour time frame? Supervised studies halls, computers, movies, and physical activity. So that didn't exist 8 or 9 years ago. That program is growing very fast. During the summers, at 3 of our clubs that have large physical plants, we serve about 1,000 kids per week in summer camps. Again, the key number for us is working with 5-year-olds to 11-year-olds. And we provide 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day. Some of the parents will even come in and pay a little bit of a premium for pre-care and aftercare if their work schedules so require. But during the day they want rotations. So we might have a tennis rotation, a dodgeball rotation, a basketball rotation, swimming. Physical activity is absolutely important, but again, parents are paying for this. I've got a book that I'd like to recommend. I wish I would have brought some slides along. There was a book that somebody gave me 6 months ago or 8 months ago called The Most Expensive Game in Town. The author is a gentleman by the name of Mark Hyman. How many of you have kids that are traveling on the weekends for soccer or lacrosse or baseball? Any of you? There's some hands went up. This book talks about what's going on with adolescents, and a typical parent might spend as much as $13,000 to $15,000 a year taking their kids to fall ball. I had never heard of that growing up. Baseball ended in kind of now. But they're playing fall ball, they're playing AAU tournaments on the weekends in various sports. This is especially prevalent in soccer and lacrosse. So clubs like ours are doing some youth training. We have, we'll have a specialist, the former field hockey coach at the University of Virginia does any number of programs for us periodically on a fee-based basis. We do the same thing with lacrosse. So the absence of physical activity has generally become a vacuum that people like ourselves and the non-for-profit community have looked to fill. In Richmond, ironically enough, as I asked each of our general managers, what are we doing? Because I'm not as tuned in to what the youth aspect of this as I am the adult aspect. Some of the Richmond schools have outsourced their PE classes to 2 of our clubs, both a middle school and a high school. And kids are getting credits for certain activities if they do a group exercise class or take a basketball lesson. So I would have to say, in summary, the for-profit community is looking at the vacuum that has been created by the absence of physical activity in the public schools and offering programs for those who can afford them.